Bruchim Aboyim to the 17th and continuing series of lectures on the 13 principles of faith of Maimonides. That is the Yud Gimel Ikkarim of the Rambam in this Perush Mishnayos in the Hasdama to Perek Chelek. I'm trying to speak over the coffee grinder, the coffee brewer, and Sati Nishma, I hope to do so, or at least make myself audible after it finishes brewing the coffee. In any case, it's been a long time since we left off for Pesach with the Ikkarim, and even though in cyberspace there's no time, at least not in our sense of time, but in any case, we're up to the 11th Ikka of the Rambam. And I'm going to read once again from the Shalat edition, which is the Akdomas of the Rambam of the misled, and on Daf Kuf Ben Hey. So Rabbi Shalat's translation of the Arabic, Hayisod HaChavasar, which is the 11th principle, Shu Yisale, Kodesh Baruch Hu, God Noisin Socha, right? He gives reward. L'misha Mekayim Tzivuy HaTorah, whoever keeps the commandments of the Torah. For Oynish, he gives punishment. L'misha Oiva Alazar Yisrael, whoever transgresses his prohibitions. V'sheschalei hayesed gadol, that the greatest schar, the greatest reward, hu Olam HaBa, is Olam HaBa. V'ansho hayesed gadol hu HaKoretz, and the greatest punishment is Kores, HaKoretz. U'chava amanu b'zeh inyan ma shedai ba. We've already spoken enough about this. The Rambam obviously is not referring. He could possibly be referring to the what he said in the beginning of the Akdama. But in any case, it's clear that the Rambam does not want to go into the details of or the background of what he's speaking about. I think actually he's probably referring to the Akdama to the Ikkarim, in which he speaks about that the tachlis, that the final goal of the Torah is Olam HaBa. So I think actually the Rambam is stressing this. Because of Moreh Nevuchim, and the pasuk which refers to this Yesod, in other words, this Yesod is something which is in our Torah, it's the Eraisa. Omroi im tisach hatosam, right? V'im ayin b'chenin ha'misifrecha. But Moshe Rabbeinu implores HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he wants, after the Chet HaEgel, this and the golden calf, that either HaKadosh Baruch Hu should forgive them, but when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, God says to Moshe Rabbeinu, I'll make you into your nation, he says, no, you can erase me from your book, from your sefer. Moshe Rabbeinu here is misled nefesh. He's willing to give up everything for Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people. Ve'shivu Yisale, because Baruch Hu answers him and says, Mi asher chotaloi. He's going to punish he who has sinned. And this is the psukim in Pashos Kisisa, it's in Shmois. Moshe Rabbeinu, right, says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this is Parak Lamed Beis, Pasuk Lamed Beis, V'yata im tisach hatosam, right, he implores HaKadosh Baruch Hu to forgive their sins. If you don't want to forgive their sins, you should erase me from your sefer. Vayema Hashem, pasuk the Gimel, El Moshe, because what's it to Moshe? Mi asher chotaloi, right? He who has sinned, and chedem yisifrei. I'll erase him. In other words, the Baruch Hu says, I'm going to punish he who has sinned, who has not sinned, I'm not going to punish. And says the Rambam, this in fact actually is coming to communicate to us, to reveal to us the 11th principle, which is schar for those who perform the mitzvahs, the commands of the Torah, and punishment for those who transgress it. Now, Raya al-Yediyah hanishma v'hamamre, l'sei socha l'zeh v'odis l'zeh. Says the Rambam that the proof that God in fact actually is knowledgeable, right, of, in other words, of the actions of man, is to give schar lazeh or nish lazeh. It's to give punishment, reward and punishment. Now, what's interesting is, I think it's important to understand, that in fact, actually, this pasuk that the Rambam brings in Shmois is actually brought in the Moreh Nevuchim. In fact, actually, the chapter that deals with punishment and reward is in chapter 17 of section 3, Perek xxii of Chelik HaShlishi. And there, the Rambam presents the different opinions of providence, of Hashgacha, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of divine providence. And for the Rambam, divine providence is actually the subject of reward and punishment. To what extent does God react or act in accordance with man's actions, or punish and reward? And of course, one of the important points of the Rambam, among the many points that the Rambam speaks about, which we'll going to speak about too, in Perek Yud, is the fact that the hashgacha, providence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is only on man, and not on any form of life. And then the Rambam, right? The Rambam says is that he says, I'm reading now from it's towards the end of Perek Yud. It's a very, very long perek. But on page 481 of the Schwartz edition, which I've been reading from, the Rambam speaks about that hashgacha, providence, in a certain sense, is commensurable with a person's intellect. The Rambam says that clearly the greater intellect, the greater providence. And therefore, because of this, since animals do not possess intellect, so therefore there is no providence on animals. Okay? The Rambam is obviously not speaking against Aristotle at this point, because according to Aristotle, there's no providence on anything, but we'll see who the Rambam is speaking against. But says the Rambam, and I'm reading down from the second paragraph from page 48, right? What brings me to this opinion that there is no providence, the only providence there is on man? We don't see any place in the prophets, any place in the Pesach or the Scripture that God will act providentially towards the animals. And the Rambam is Paul Shiesh Shkachal Pete Adam Shrei Ukal Erech B'chtei Shiyushkach Koshein Alechayim Acher. Even the deer, right? Right? You got this. Go down the best. The Torah writes explicitly on providence of the specific acts of other people. In other words, reward and punishment for their actions. Ne'emak, he brings a pasuk in Shemais, which is Lamadalet, Uvayim Pakoid Ufakadati Alei Chatosa. So the Rambam brings a pasuk which I didn't bring over here. Right, sorry, I read the pasuk wrong. Uvayim Pakti Ufakadati Alei Chatosa. But Baruch Hu promises to give reward. Then the Rambam says, V'ne'emak, and it says, Mia Shechad Ali Emchem. This is the pasuk, this is the verse the Rambam this is the verse the Rambam brought here in the right? So, in other words, the Rambam followed the pasuk, but it's clear here. I mean, we see the chapter 17. The Rambam is coming. See, in chapter 17, Rambam is coming to stress that hashgacha, providence is on mankind, at least and animals. But here, in fact, actually, in the Ahava, the Rambam brings as a source that there is actually going to be that there is schar v'onish amen. There is hashgacha. In fact, actually, is from the same pasuk. Okay, so in other words, in chapter 17 in the guide, the Rambam is coming from a different angle. He's coming to prove that there isn't hashgacha on the animals, on the animals, and here he's just coming to prove that. But that's more or less the same thing, and we needn't bother ourselves with this. However, the point that I would like to bring up here is something different. The Rambam says explicitly and mentions that the greatest harm for a person is Olam HaBa. The Rambam mentions Olam HaBa. Now, the fact is, the schar v'oinish, the reward and punishment that the Rambam is speaking about in chapter 17 is most definitively not Olam HaBa. In fact, not is it Olam HaBa, rather Olam HaZeh. But the Rambam actually attacks competing theories of providence by virtue of the fact that they stress that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God, will punish people in Olam HaZeh, in this world, in order to increase their reward, their schar in Olam HaBa. So, on page 478, this is once again chapter 17 in the third section of the guide. Page 478, I'm reading from the Schwartz edition, the second and last paragraph. Says the Rambam, I'm going to summarize the other theories of providence, philosophies of providence. Of course, Aristotle doesn't believe in providence. Aristotle believes that things happen purely coincidentally. The El Ashari, says the Rambam. Once again, the Rambam goes into these philosophies in depth, but the Rambam is summarizing it. El Ashari Sofer, she said, "Matayim lechevetz greater." God just does what He wills, independent of what man does. Hametalezim Sofer, she said, "Toyim lechochma." But Muslims say that God acts in accordance with His wisdom, right? For Anu Sofer, we, says the Rambam, right? That means Toras Moshe. She said, "Matim lebashoy lo adon lefi ma'aseh." The God Baruch Hu will act, reward and punishment in accordance with His actions, only in accordance with His actions. Okay? Lachein roye el hashari. So therefore, the Ashari maintain what a possibility. Shakel yasi ish ba'olam v'toy ba'olam HaZeh, that God will punish or subject to suffering a good person, a worthy person in this world. Right? This, God will do anything He wants. But Metalazer, Metalazer, the opinion, she said, "Oh, well, this is terrible." She said, "Sheyusar, that a person should be, subjected to suffering, right?" But they say, right, that right, yellow pizzoi, but he will have a pizzoi. In other words, he'll be rewarded. Will he be rewarded? He'll be rewarded in the next world. In other words, this is actually their opinion. In other words, the opinion of the Metalezer, which the Rambam, once again, I'm going to go back to page 477, that they'll say, I'm on the end of the first paragraph of 477, this is once again chapter 17, section 3, that God punishes a man, even though he's righteous, to increase his schar in the next world. And the Rambam rejects this completely. Those of you who've learned brachos, what about the sugya in brachos, the Heman Aleph of Yesurim shel Ahava? So the Rambam actually addresses the sugya. This is, once again, now we're on the last two lines of page 479. So the Rambam says, says the Rambam, there appears among the sages something does not actually appear in the Chumash. This is what some sages say. Yesurim shel Ahava. Says the Rambam, according to his opinion, sometimes the person will suffer not because of sin. I'm turning over the page to 480. And we should increase his reward. And schar means, as Rashi says, Olam HaBa. Says the Rambam, this is the opinion of the Metalezer. But says the Rambam, but there's no source in the Chumash for this. So therefore, in a very definitive sense, Maimonides, the Rambam rejects the notion of Yesurim shel Ahava. He says this is the opinion of some of the sages, but this is not the opinion of Toras Moshe. That's what the Rambam says. So, what's interesting is that if we look at the discussion, this is my major question on this axiom of faith. The discussion in chapter 17 of section 3 focuses on what the Rambam understands to be the position of the Torah, Toras Moshe, that a person will be punished and rewarded in this world for his acts, whether he does righteous acts or evil acts. And we shouldn't say that a person will suffer in this world in order to increase his schar, in order to increase his reward in the next world. Now, if this is true, why does the Rambam in the Yisod HaChalas, now of course why does the Rambam in the Yisod HaChalas 11th principle, when he speaks about schar, reward for a person who keeps the Torah, and oynesh, and punishment for a person who transgresses the Torah, why does he speak about haschar hayesh gadol ba'olam haba? There is for sure a schar ba'olam haba, but the schar and the schar ba'olam haba is, as the Rambam says, is for tzaddikim in Mishnah Torah. But nonetheless, in the context of the discussion of schar va'onesh, reward and punishment, olam haba, in a certain sense, doesn't play a role. There is a schar and olam haba, the Rambam says in the Mishnah Torah olam haba, but in the Rambam's discussion of the Toras Moshe, that a person will inordinately be rewarded and punished only for his actions, the Rambam understands that that reward and punishment will come in this world. Schar olam haba is something different, but it has nothing to do. In other words, it's an extra schar that a person at tzaddik gets. He gets the olam haba, but it doesn't in any way figure into what we would call the shita, the philosophy of the Torah, Toras Moshe, the Rambam presents in chapter 17, right? On schar va'onesh. On the contrary, the only time the Rambam invokes olam haba in the entire Moreh Nevuchim, you'll be happy to know, or you'll be surprised to know, is only when he speaks about his opinion of the Metalezer, who believe that a person, God will forego the reward of a person, of a righteous person in this world, and even cause him to suffer in order to increase his schar, his reward in the next world, the Olam HaBa. The Rambam rejects that principle. So the question that I'm really posing is that what does Olam HaBa here have to do with the schar va'onesh of the Yisod HaChalasa, which is, I would presume, the schar va'onesh, the Rambam presents it in the Mishnah Torah. Now, if we're speaking about believing in Olam HaBa, that's already a 13th principle. Yisod HaShvoi Shalsa. The Rambam speaks about xxiv. Xxiv. Okay, we're going to speak about xxiv and Olam HaBa, what this means. That will be an entirely different subject matter. But in other words, Olam HaBa does not play a role, according to the Rambam, in Toras Moshe of the proposition, or the assumption, or the dogma, the axiom, that Kodesh Baruch Hu rewards and punishes people because of it, only because of their actions. That's the question I'm asking. Okay, now, it seems to me that it's possible to give two answers. One, we might call an academic answer, a scholarly answer. The Abarbanel writes at the end of Rosh Hashanah that, in fact, the Yud Gimel Ikkarim were aimed at what we call the common people, also. In other words, the Moreh Nevuchim, the guide, was aimed at who the Rambam felt was a person who was schooled in philosophy and physics, as the Rambam speaks about in his introduction. But the Ikkarim, the 13 principles that appear in his introduction to his commentary in the Mishnah to the last chapter in Sanhedrin, are aimed at the common people. Could it be that in chapter 17, the Rambam is speaking, let's call to the educated, the intellectuals, and then the Rambam is coming to tell us that the belief of Toras Moshe is in the irreducible concept of free will. And for this reason, the Rambam said that it's wrong for a person to think that God will punish a person because if he's righteous. The Rambam attributes this to the philosophy of the Metalezer, and the Rambam says that Toras Moshe is against this in principle, philosophically, because to punish a person despite his good acts would somehow contradict the irreducible free will of a person, which the Rambam speaks about in many places in the Moreh Nevuchim. The Rambam in chapter 32, section 3, speaks about in this talk of the Tamei mitzvah, the reason for the mitzvahs, the Rambam says that why God did not, simply, imagine monotheism or how to direct the paganism, the Avodah, which the Jews had held after the Mitzrayim, says the Rambam, because the nature of man is irreducible. But somehow told light to end well. The Rambam really the position, chapter 17. What about a tzaddik, a person who suffers? So the Rambam saying to us is that God's knowledge is infinite. His essence, as he said, chapter 69. And for the true intellectual, the answer is that because of the infinity of God's knowledge, then a person accepting God's knowledge should not have a problem accepting the fact that a person, for reasons which are not known to us, but in fact God will have reasons axiomatic to accept the person will be punished for his acts. But perhaps I don't know the issue of tzaddik v'raloi, a righteous person who suffers, that this type of an answer would not go over or cannot be explained easily to the Hainam, to the masses. So it could possibly be for the masses, the mentaleza philosophy of providence was good enough. So long as a person believes that he will ultimately be punished and rewarded because of his actions, and even if that punishment or reward is not seen in this world, he should believe that ultimately he will be rewarded for his actions and punished for his evil. So for this, it's enough that he should believe that the punishment will come in Olam HaBa. So in other words, the principle presented in the Moreh Nevuchim, the Godfreplex, is what I want to call the lechila, the a priori philosophy of the Torah, but it's not the Torah for which the educated will be able to understand and live with. What the Rambam is presenting in the Hakdama, the Yesod Achadas 11 principle, is an answer that people will live with, because the most important thing is that people should believe that Kadosh Baruch Hu will punish, will reward, and even though this reward will come in Olam HaBa, because people see that tzaddik can suffer, even the Gemara in Berachos speaks about Moshe Rabbeinu asking the question, why is there tzaddik v'raloi, why is a righteous person suffer? So the Rambam felt that this answer was appropriate in the Yud Gimel Ikkarim, in the 30 principles of faith, which were intended for a different audience. I think this is really perhaps the first place we've seen in the 13 principles where the Rambam is willing to present what we would call a posteriori. It's called actually b'di'evet. I don't know exactly how to translate it in English. In other words, a b'di'evet philosophy, right? Because in a certain sense, this will achieve a proper hashka, right? For a person in a position to understand a more complex chapter 17. It's very that in the Rambam, for example, in chapter 25 in section 2, speaks about that even though a person a priori should believe in creation ex nihilo, nonetheless the person wants, he can believe in the Platonic theory of eternity, because at the end, this philosophy, even though it's not the philosophy of the Torah, nonetheless with this the person can believe in nisim and miracles. In other words, the Rambam says to preserve the proper Torah outlook on things, it's possible to present the person with a philosophy which might not be the absolute true philosophy according to Torah, but is sufficient in order to serve as a basis, right, for belief in the chosenness of the Jewish people, and for miracles, and for prophets, and hashgacha, etc., etc. So here the Rambam too, right, is actually going for a b'di'evet, not a philosophy which the Rambam held was the true philosophy, but it's a philosophy which is sufficient. It's a sufficient philosophy in order that people should believe that Kadosh Baruch Hu, God, will reward and punish. I think that's what one could say. I would call that maybe an academic. I don't want to call it an academic answer, but I think that that's an answer which will suffice. Yeah.
According to the real answer, why is this an acceptable answer? Because there is a sheet like that in Chazal.
Because at least we know that God, Kadosh Baruch Hu, is giving reward and punishment. I mean, the important thing is a person should believe that there's hashgacha.
Right. And
in other words, this is hashgacha. That's what the Rambam says. It's follows from yediyah, from knowledge. In other words, if I believe that God is mashgiach on the world and punishes rewards in accordance with his actions, even though that reward might come in the next world, in other words, my free will is not completely irreducible, at least, right? Nonetheless, that's good enough.
Will the true student of Toras Moshe Rabbeinu from Moreh Nevuchim also believe this principle? Is this a sub?
No. He'll believe the principle in much more of a, let's call it a much more of a mahad. It'll be a mahad in a way. It'll be more mahuda.
But he'll believe in this principle.
Right. That's
my problem is at the end, when the Rambam says somebody who doesn't believe this is not part of Yisrael.
No. Doesn't believe at least this.
This is a lower level,
right?
And you have to believe in one more.
Right. Okay, so that I think is one answer we give for the Rambam. However, I think that one could perhaps give another answer. Okay, the Rambam speaks about Schora Yesod Gadol Olam HaBa. Right? And the Rambam says, Ukeva Amano B'Zai in Mashadai. What the Rambam here is referring to is discussion in the beginning of this Hakdama's introduction, which speaks about that the purpose is in fact Olam HaBa. In conclusion, the Rambam is saying over here, what is the Rambam's purpose of the Ikkarim? The Rambam explains, but we didn't go this into detail. We only went into the actual Ikkarim themselves. But the purpose of the Ikkarim is that a person should have the proper beliefs, because only by proper beliefs does a person get to Olam HaBa. If Olam HaBa means, at least in this sense, as the Rambam understands it, that it's the Olam HaShamayis, as he speaks about in detail in Paraches and Hilchos Shuvah, where a person's intellect communicates with his name is Shechina, which means through a person's intellect he connects with the intellect of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. And the purpose of the Ikkarim is that a person, right, with these beliefs, right, will get a schar in Olam HaBa. So, in other words, how could the Rambam, right? In other words, it is true that a person has to believe that God punishes and rewards and goes with a person's actions. But the Rambam here is coming to command us on beliefs, not on acts. And for the Rambam, it's clear the schar for beliefs and the disbelief is Olam HaBa. In other words, in the context of the Ikkarim, right? A person has to believe. The Rambam is saying, in other words, Askar Yesod Gadol. In other words, the Rambam is coming to tell us that we have to believe not only that God is going to reward us for our good acts, but God also is going to reward us for believing in these Ikkarim, in these acts in themselves. And for the Rambam, it's clear from his Hakdama, from his introduction, that the reward for believing in this is actually, in fact, Olam HaBa. So, in other words, the Rambam certainly has to include the schar reward of belief in Olam HaBa, if for no other reason that it will, because this is, in other words, he's engaged in the he's engaging himself in actually beliefs here, and not actions. So, in other words, the Rambam is not really only coming to communicate that God rewards and punishes, but the Rambam is also coming to communicate that beliefs are important too, and through beliefs a person comes to merit the reward in the Olam HaShamayis of his intellect. So, and that comes only according to the Rambam by virtue of proper beliefs. So, for sure, in the context of the Yud Gimel Ikkarim, the Rambam also has to include in the belief, in the schar, in the reward, as that of Olam HaBa, because it's not important that, in fact, actually, that I perform the acts of the Torah. It's important that I believe the acts of the Torah. In fact, the Rambam, in fact, at the very end of the Ikkarim, has a very cryptic statement, says that even if a person transgresses the Torah, if he believes these things, he'll get Olam HaBa. So, how could the Rambam write in the 11th Ikka that if God will not reward me, right, if I don't do righteous acts, but I believe in the Ikkarim? So in order for the Rambam to extricate himself from this paradox, the Rambam is forced to include too the schar in Olam HaBa. Okay, this is how I understand why the Rambam includes Olam HaBa. Okay, I think we're going to stop over here, because, of course, there's much to say over here, but in Mitzvah Shem, next week we're going to go on, well, next week actually might be actually tomorrow, but of course, cyberspace and cyber time and physical time are two different things. But the next Ikka which we're going to speak about next time with Hashem will be the Yesod HaShnei Masah, the 12th principle, which is Yemos Mashiach, the Messianic age. Until then, from another close place in Yerushalayim Kodesh. Be well.